Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge, a spoiler-free, chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel, The Deluge by Stephen Markley. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon, and I, for one, see no problem with handling albedo management to Mark Zuckerberg, but worse. Today we are discussing Guns, Walls, and Sulfur Dioxide, set in 2035, the fourth chapter from Jackie's point of view, which we are presenting in the form of our expertise, a pitch deck.
A pitch deck.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very formal, very... I don't even know what an advertising word is for good at it. Surely there is one.
I know we're good at concise problems and state solutions, and we state those not taking 74 minutes to do that. But let's see if we can make it work this time.
Oh, man. Okay. I thought this chapter was so interesting and generative, and I had so many thoughts about it.
Yes.
But one thing that was really fucking with my mind the whole time is I kind of felt like there was two things going on at the same time the whole time, but I could only access the surface thing and I couldn't access the other thing. And I was wondering, A, if you can relate to this experience of reading this chapter at all, or B, if you have any theories about that experience or that feeling.
For question one, I have been puzzling to no avail over the what does the title of this chapter mean question that you posed to me, and I still don't understand.
It's so different from the Guns, Walls, and Sulfur Dioxide. I texted John, I feel like now I can't remember exactly what I said, but these have been riddles that we were supposed to solve and we didn't.
I'd be I'd be a little disappointed in us if there was some riddle about the deluge that we don't solve.
Yeah. I know. Me too.
That would indict this whole project a tiny bit.
A tiny bit. Yeah. No, I have confidence in us in that respect, but I did feel in this chapter like something is going on. Something else is going on.
I have a mini theory for how we get the titles from Jackie 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, but that doesn't work for Jackie 1 to 2. I can't make it. I can't figure it out.
What is the theory,
nothing.
Though?
It's that the chapter title is actually the chapter title of that character, of Jackie's subsequent chapter. Right. So new energy horizons, right, actually appears in this
text.
Chapter. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that doesn't
Guns,
work.
Walls, and Sulfur Dioxide is
a setup for her next chapter, which I think does work.
Okay.
In a cryptic foreshadowing.
Okay.
Perhaps overly strong, but we're heading towards the end.
Yeah. I'm kind of sad.
I do have a theory in response to your second question about this chapter.
Okay.
That this chapter is kind of the breaking point for Jackie in the ongoing crisis of self-definition and sense of self that she has been struggling with since the first page of Jackie in the novel The Deluge.
Yeah.
And that this is a chapter where through a series of reckonings, right, reckoning kind of with Fred, reckoning with what Fred and Tara Fund are doing, and most of all, this reckoning conversation with Jeffrey, that through this series of reckonings, we get the dialectical process of Jackie through which she finally synthesizes some attempt to define herself by herself and exercise some agency over that. Yeah. Because both Fred and Jeffrey posit different paths that at various points she has allowed herself to be defined or set upon as going down, but she also rejects them. And both of them also challenge who Jackie thinks she actually is. And so through that multiply tiered conflict between her and Fred, her and Jeffrey, she has to try to figure out a sense of self amidst it all. And that this is the chapter in which she kind of resolves in the final paragraph to maybe try to do that. That's my theory.
But it's so fascinating, I think, to frame it, and I think that's exactly right, but to frame it as kind of a process of acquiring self-knowledge is really fascinating to think about the process of rendering that in prose while hiding to some degree, some facets of like the truth from the character herself, but also kind of from the audience, right? And whether that's like Jackie hiding parts of herself from us or from Jeffrey or from Fred, or whether that's Mark Lee like being clever about when to reveal who Jackie is for the purpose of kind of building suspense around her role, like in the broader kind of acceleration of plot, right?
Yeah.
And both like plot in terms of characters increasingly becoming more intertwined and appearing in each other's chapters, but also like the plot of climate change, right?
Yes.
Like that.
May I offer the both and here?
Yeah.
And I think that even the opening of this chapter tells that it's a both and, because we have Mark Lee writing Jackie doing therapy. And it's like, okay, this can go one of two directions. It's a therapy scene in which the writer or creator of a show, and obviously I'm thinking about The Sopranos here, like reveals something about that character by having them be in therapy, or the writer or creator reveals the inability of somebody to define themselves or understand themselves by having them be within therapy. And I think that we get that it's more the latter, because Jackie lies to her therapist about her nightmares and like how she experiences them in a bodily way. So Mark Lee's like, I'm teasing you that I could do the big self-reveal here through the therapy scene, but I'm going to withhold that from you and make you, and thus make Jackie, go through the series of conflicts, conversations, confronting / not confronting the world and climate change. Yeah. And then maybe by the end of the chapter, we've gotten to the thing that I could have done at the beginning, but didn't.
Well, and it's really interesting because we see her lying about some things, but also intentionally not lying about other things.
Correct.
Like the fact that she's relieved that her mom is dead, right? And she says, or she pauses upon revealing that. And it's sort of like, well, does she want to reveal that because that's a emotion that she feels like she actually needs to work through? Or does she want, for some reason, her therapist to perceive her as somebody who feels that way or who has that sense of relief?
A question I've never asked myself or ask myself every other week,
it's really, and I think for me, what also really kind of brought the double, I almost experienced, I don't even know why doubling is kind of like the frame that keeps coming to mind and thinking about the experience of reading this chapter, but it's sort of like they're like, she's a double almost.
Yes. No, I think that's precisely right.
Or like she's walking down two parallel but not overlapping paths kind of simultaneously. Yes. And then the question at the end is like, which, they verge, and it's like, now you have to pick one or something,
You previously commented on the way that Mark Lee writes Jackie as having this intensely self-questioning internal monologue, reviewing all of her actions and her utterances. And to me, that's where the doubling comes in. And that it's the fact that whatever the self is doing, there's also the commenting self running in that parallel track that I think does make Jackie a kind of constantly doubled character.
And it's really fascinating that we open the chapter with this therapy, but then, and when we close it with her having read something that ostensibly she wasn't supposed to read.
Correct.
And we don't know what it is, but all we know is that she's suddenly like, it appears to be almost like steeled with kind of like resolve. Yes. Or resignation, unclear. But like in some way, she's like kind of like solidified. Like she is more, and it's like a very subtle narrative construction, but she appears more solid in some way.
Yes.
At the very end, but it's like so light and not specific that it's like we don't know what lends her that What's even the right word?
It's in part the structure of the novel itself, because we have had a running theme and commentary of, well, we're just going to like read out loud the final paragraph of every single chapter because it's so portentous, or there's this really amazing imagery that also speaks to whatever. And here, I think it's almost by contrast that Jackie's the lightness of whatever minimal certitude or resolve she has discovered, built, whatever word we want to use there, that we're supposed to read that as momentous despite its kind of halting nature.
Yeah. So I made a list of all the like emotion adjacent words that she uses in this chapter.
I'm into this.
It's guilty, imposter anxiety, fear, and fear gets used more than once. And sometimes it refers to her own fear and sometimes to Fred's, which is interesting. Resent or resentment, stressed, vindictive, which is not an emotion word, but she uses it in a context where she's experiencing a kind of emotional reaction to something, and she uses it as a way to describe another person. She talks about revulsion, ashamed, shame, appalled, sorrowful, furious, defensive, and then dread appears too. But I thought even like they're all kind of passively constructed emotion words, right? I felt revulsion. I felt ashamed, rather than the kind of like active, I don't know. There's something like somewhat passive about these ways that she's narrating her emotional states. And I think it has to do with that, like doubling or that gap, or like how did you just frame it? It was really good. The commenting
the self and the commenting self.
Yeah. Like the commenting self is like observing emotions, and we get that rather than the self experiencing them kind of in real time. And there's a lot of like those timeline kind of jumps too, right? We get a lot of like how they spent the siege, right?
Yes. And how they spent the heat wave, but
that we get all that within the duration of their ostensibly hour-long fight that they have over lunch or something.
Despite this chapter being one of the few and perhaps the only times in which there's this very direct, almost immediate, there's this immediacy between the end of that character's previous chapter where she discovers her mom. And this chapter also starts with her commenting self talking with her therapist about discovering her mom. So there's a more direct relationship between the previous Jackie chapter's end and this Jackie chapter's beginning than I feel like almost any other character one book to the next.
Yeah. One more kind of little thing about the sort of like relationship between the self and the commenting self. I thought, and there's only a couple places in the chapter where it kind of crystallizes, but the discussion of like when she feels safe or what it would take for her to feel safe, I thought was really interesting, because in some ways it's at odds with the points that she pushes back, at least against Fred, and captures, I think, some truth about the way that Jeffrey sees her, right?
That's an excellent way to put it.
She's like collected wealth in part as a way to shield herself from whatever it is that she thinks is sort of like unpleasant or dangerous, right? And she's like uneasy when she's around hungry people, right? She's uneasy when there's no security guards nearby, right? And then she feels safe when she sees that scene where they're at lunch and she sees the car. Yeah.
I think that this chapter is in part drawing on your precise distinction between the role that Fred plays and the role that Jeffrey plays in this chapter. I think the kind of dialectic she has to do is reject Fred as the person she is in the process of becoming. And fascinatingly, a fight over the pasture is the hinge that starts to like drop the veil on 594 to 595. And then they also fight. But she also does not want to become Jeffrey. Rather, Jeffrey's role is to call her on her bullshit and kind of confront her with the, like veneer of safety you were talking about that her wealth has provided to insulate her, and how much she likes that.
Yeah.
Right? And how tied and how emotionally invested in that she is. And there's like several like different moments of this in the conversation with Jeffrey, right? There's the fact that Jackie offers what she thinks is the reasonable perspective that everyone agrees with, simply that, okay, what Love did is bad, but also what Kate did, you know, put them in that position or whatever, and thus risked it. And Jeffrey's like, absolutely fucking not. And, you know, my wife would beat you up or whatever it is he says if she
tear you a new one.
Tear you a new one. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Which leads Jackie to say, I kept finding myself saying things I didn't actually believe.
Yeah.
So that's kind of confrontation number one of Jackie and her actual self and getting her out of her commenting self loop. Then the second is when they start talking about climate a little bit, start talking about Tara Fund, and Jeffrey says to her on 599, no, I get it. You have to convince yourself that doing well and doing good are the same thing. The whole world is run by people who think that when the dark days come, they'll just sub in money for justice and it'll all be fine. So that's kind of confrontation number two. And Jeffrey, no lies detected. Like, that is exactly right. Yeah. And I'll get into that more later on in the episode, and I suspect you will as well. But then there's the third, in which I think is like the final breaking point for Jackie, at which point she snaps. And that, I think, is what like makes those two paths that you were talking about converge, or she has to go find a new one. And this is Jeffrey and her fighting about wanting kids. Yeah, but your version of growing up just meant buying more bullshit. Just spending our whole weekend in some depressing lifestyle store, blowing money on more useless fucking garbage we didn't need. The longer we were together, the more I didn't like the person you were underneath, or the person you were trying so hard to become. So maybe I did lie. Yes, it wasn't that I didn't want to have kids. It was I didn't want to have them with you.
Yeah.
Devastating.
So harsh. And it's interesting too, because her defense there is that, like, you don't know what it's like to grow up poor and racked with debt, what debt does to a family. But he's like, but you weren't doing it for that. You were doing it for something else, right? So like that gap between what she understood as a practical kind of response to the particular trauma of her childhood, but actually it's something else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like Mark Lee writing Jeffrey's, the longer we were together, the more I didn't like the person you were underneath or the person you were trying so hard to become, because those are the two paths, once again, or the self and the commenting self, or the self and the aspirational self. And even in the indictment of Jackie's self, there's this recognition of Jackie's selfhood is always doubled.
Right, right. Or maybe there's even like a tripart self that you just laid out, right? Because the
Freud?
aspirational self, right, is not the same as the commenting self.
True.
Or even the like base self to some degree, if there is such a thing. But like, or like maybe if we're thinking about the things that sort of shape Jackie, even when she's acting in a way that like she consciously knows is kind of contrary to either who she is or who she wants to be, right? Yeah. That there is like a past self or something that kind of is part of the commenting self, but not the sum total of the commenting self in some way.
Yeah.
Wow. Too many selves.
Yeah. I guess we need a good old ego, super ego id situation for our pal Jackie.
She always, Freud always comes up in these chapters, which is very, very interesting. I also thought, kind of on that topic, the discussion she has with her therapist about like wanting to marry Fred is really interesting, because she's like, she doesn't trust why it matters to her, or even really know why it matters to her. And she has to like dismiss the importance of it, or the question it raises for her about like his commitment to her, I guess, or their seriousness kind of as a couple. But she like kind of forecloses taking up that part of the question under the guise that like she's merely interested in this idea, retrograde idea, because it's sort of like conditioned in her or something like that, right?
Which is a direct tie to the first chapter and her commenting self, observing and thinking about how gender norms script her interaction with then the actor, later the pastor.
Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting way, I think, to like not ask a hard question.
Yes. And I think it's good therapy and some like experience that Mark Lee sets up for the reader, because it's like, well, isn't that something we're all doing all the time?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And Jackie, I think, is more than any of the other characters, with maybe the exception of Keeper, who we get next when we get a full chapter, is the vehicle through which he sets up that dynamic.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. So it's not just like, in what ways is Jackie not asking the hard questions about her personal life? It's like, in what way are none of us asking the hard questions about climate change?
Yeah. How are we self-deceiving about ourselves, but also about climate change or genocide in Gaza or
democracy?
Or democracy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. So clever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wrestling with to what degree I identify with Jackie. Also, we get a confirmation of her age here.
She's literally my age.
In 2035, she's 48.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah. So
I will also be that age in 2035.
Yeah. So. I'll be 47. Yeah. Yeah. It's bizarre because I feel like, I know we've talked about this before, but I don't know. There's a world where like giving up on, you know, I don't actually think so, but I could see like a path where giving up on things that I care about for something like the promise of security would have, like, there's a version of the multiverse where like that made sense, or that calculation
absolutely
was a risk, was like worth it, you know, doing that risk benefit analysis or whatever.
Same for me. Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, that's tough too. And I think that's maybe what one kind of function that Jackie as a character serves in terms of like a foil for the reader.
Yes, especially because I think we determined that what Mark Lee's a couple years older than we are, right? So the fact that there are all these millennial characters. It's also the question you posed to us last time of, you know, who and where is Mark Lee beyond the most easily and obviously character cipher of Matt.
Mm-hmm. We learn a little more, but also less about Anonosiki.
My God, I still don't know how to pronounce it, but it seems what we learn already about them is shady as fuck, and B, they're up to more things in this secret document that Jackie reads, but Mark Lee hides from the reader.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
I do think there's some interesting insight that Fred has actually about how wealth functions for Jackie and among like their elite brethren. Like his theory that the rich are actually jealous of her upbringing at the same time that she feels her imposter syndrome about it. I think there's something quite perceptive about that from Fred, even if Fred sucks generally. Yeah, because he wants to donate money to the pastor because it's good for business. Speaking of our prior McGurk chapter.
Yeah. Well, also, I was really struck by that passage because it has nothing whatsoever to do with political values or arguably anything political in the kind of traditional sense whatsoever. And I think it's a really like laid bare, probably truth about like the actual limits of party politics to like in any sense relate meaningfully to capital, if that is like a fair kind of
I like that idea
assessment. Like, what does he say?
As long as we don't elect anyone dumb enough to interfere and strand good tech fixes, that's the only thing that freaks me out. If an AOC or Zai Howe administration shuts down innovation, all this to say, we might be making a few campaign contributions to the pastor next year.
Yeah. And then the next page, right, he says, like, I'm curious who you'll vote for. No one's beating Love in the primary. He's got the party infrastructure by the throat. I know you're a bleeding heart, but not enough to vote third party socialist, I assume. And she perceives cruelty in his voice, right? And then he said, you're the one who's fighting. All I said was the pastor's going to be a serious candidate and donors are paying attention, right? And like, but then he means himself, right? Like he's a donor.
Yes. Yes.
But also it's part of his job to anticipate donors and like help the donors make more money to some degree, right? And so that the influence that they want to exert has nothing whatsoever to do with questions of justice, with questions of democratic principle, and everything to do with like who will make it easiest for us to continue to do what we're doing, if not like increase what we're doing or scale up what we're doing. It's very bleak.
It's incredibly bleak.
Also, it's something that like we know, but to have it rendered in the context of like a fight between lovers is really fascinating.
The personal is political, as they say.
As they say. Who says that, John? Oh, man.
Jackie's general observation of, or lack of observation of politics throughout the chapter is notable. This is another chapter in which structurally Markley is advancing a bunch of political information, both domestically and abroad.
Yeah.
And that leads Jackie to oftentimes in her commenting self observe her reactions to things that are happening. Like, so I'm thinking about 582 and her and Fred are thinking about China, I believe, and ESG and such. And Jackie's glad that she at least notices when she talks like a finance ghoul. Fred just talks like a finance ghoul. Jackie understands and recognizes, her commenting self sees that. But more broadly, I think there's a general sense of helplessness and lack of agency, and what do I do? And, you know, I could just giving money to the ACLU seems totally insufficient, but it's not a coincidence that that's what Jackie initially defaults to after August 1st and so on and so forth. So
yeah. And then the way she describes like the difficulty of managing the most socially responsible hedge fund is really jarring too, right? She says, these positions and trades moved so fast, powered by incomprehensible complex systems models, and socially responsible investing could become an ever retreating goal.
Yeah.
Still, I thought this was an excellent way to capture the attention of new investors. So even like
disgusting,
even her own motivations are muddled.
Yes.
Right? Like, does she actually think socially responsible investing is sort of like intrinsically valuable? Or is it that she wants to appear as someone to other investors who cares about socially responsible investing?
Right. Is it herself or her public performance of self? To just add another now in the quadrilateral of selves.
Yeah.
And I think that Jackie, the character, would like to know whether or not she thinks that ESG is good, period, or good because it's good for the firm or the fund or to attract investors. Well, and I don't think that she knows.
But it seems like that's what we're setting up as the like potential reveal, or the secret that she has learned, right? I think.
Yeah. There's so much cryptic foreshadowing in this chapter. It's insane. And just like a lot of mysteries that Markley is seeding in this chapter. The secret report, the redacted parts, Ananoski, Monitza Faruqi is doing a story. This position, the position for disruption, great name. You know, could be a episode title, but I went in a different direction.
I wrote down every title from the book. Or from this chapter. It's like such a weird. This is why I'm like, there's a code. This is code. What's it code for? I don't know. Okay, should we talk about the moral question in this chapter?
Please.
So it strikes me that a lot of the things we're talking about, even so far in the discussion, are also have to do with like Jackie's sense of herself as an agent. Like, to what degree is she responsible for anything, including her own actions?
Everything from her own actions to the ongoing heat death of the planet. Yeah. And everything in between.
And like, I think even to some degree, like the death of her mother, like, you know, like all of these things, like to what degree has she had a hand in it, and what kind of hand has she had in it? Or like, to what degree is she intentionally not asking that question, which is like another way of asking the question.
Yes.
But I thought that Markley intentionally renders this as like a game in this chapter, and particularly in the like lunch or dinner I think she has with her old friend Linda Holiday.
Yes.
So this is on page 589. Okay, so Linda says, it's gotten cut fucking throat at the firm. Like, we are doing work for anyone with the cash. This mining firm committing human rights abuses left and right in Equatorial Guinea. Sure, why not? Let's rehab your brand. And then Jackie says, better than the code of thieves that is finance. At least there's, I don't know what to call it, a weird mercenary honor to the ad or the PR world. You have adversaries, right? And you're this hired gun meant to fight the wars that need to be fought. Being around funds, it's bloodless. Every trader has to be close to an aneurysm at all times to lure talent and keep people off the ledge. Everyone at my firm gets a shrink, a masseuse, and an art budget. It's totally nutty. And I thought like that as two frames for these moral questions is really fascinating. Like, are you merely observing, right, this code of thieves, which in some, I think is almost a kind of romantic way to render
extremely
the moral world of finance, because it suggests that like, I mean, maybe I'm just like too much of a like leftist Marxist, but there's some like romanticization of like thievery that is actually about undermining the kind of power of the wealthy. So there's a sort of paradox here that like that the wealthy get so wealthy from like deploying a counter morality to the status quo, but like they're not thieving from people who are more powerful than them. They are thieving from people who are less powerful than them, and just like building more and more and more out of arguably nothing.
Are you thieving up or thieving down?
Yeah. And I think she like misses an opportunity to actually be realistic about what that code of thieves is or means, and with just this gloss. But then also the idea that like if you're a mercenary, you are somehow more absolved of guilt or culpability because you're just a hired hand. Like,
hired gun, literally.
Hired gun. Yeah. That's so fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what are the possible ways to think about our own complicity for Jackie in this construction? And like, do we think that's what she really thinks? Or is that just her like way of living with what she does?
Wow, there's so many places to go. I'll talk about the version of that for us is what compromises with institutions are we necessarily making by being part of and doing the work of legitimizing the institution at higher educational institutions that we are a part of, despite whatever critiques or attempts to do things differently or counter or whatever are a part of that process and that existence within them. That's the you and I version, I think.
Yeah. On
the Jackie profession scale, obviously there's the much bigger set of scales about responsibility and moral agency, about climate change, about choose horrific violence being conducted fully or partly in your name.
It's so interesting because I feel like she wants to, like, she doesn't want to see Fred clearly, is I think part of it. But I'm like, is it because of what that means for like this man that she loves, or what it means for how she views herself?
Those two things aren't yet severable from one another for her, right?
Right. I think so. Yeah. And she gets, kind of interestingly, I think he surprises her in this chapter on something that is on the surface merely about their interpersonal relationship. But I think the place it's placed in the chapter, I think also suggests that it in some way speaks to the broader moral question of what they do in the world, right? So in therapy in the beginning, Jackie's talking about how Fred won't get divorced and they can't get married, right? This is like her retrograde desires for marriage and the wedding and like her friends being jealous or whatever. And then at the end, she's had her dinner with Jeffrey she comes home. Fred he's affected by something, right? Yep. And he tells her that the divorce papers, he took care of them so they can get married. And then he also tells her that he was at dinner with Peter and they watched a young couple set themselves on fire, right? Mm-hmm. So he is like traumatized from having watched someone, as she frames it, like harm themselves, right? Commit violence on themselves or witness violence, right? Mm-hmm. And like the juxtaposition of those two things is, I think, really suggestive, but I don't know exactly what it's suggesting, right? Are we supposed to be surprised that he has this visceral reaction to witnessing that? Does that change how we think of him and whether or not we're sympathetic to him? Is he still like a evil capitalist villain, or is he merely like a dumb guy who isn't very good at managing his like relationships with women or something, right? And like, mm-hmm. what's the relationship between being those two things? And then like Correct. This moment where there's like a crack kind of in his certainty about the rightness of what he's doing. Like, what do we read in that crack? And then like, what does it say that whatever Jackie learns after this is the thing that kind of like steals her?
Well, I think that final question is one that Markley leaves open, and purposely so, because there's just in the span of not even a full page, right? But 4 paragraphs, 3.5 paragraphs, the couple who self-immolated. So another chapter closing with young people lighting themselves on fire, right? Second one of those. Whatever it is that she reads in the secret document, the aftermath of her conversation with Jeffrey, and I think true to Jackie's lack of self-transparency more than the average person, because obviously self-transparency is impossible, means that like Markley cannot in a Jackie POV chapter say, this is the thing that led Jackie to make the sandwiches for the gas station protesters, to resolve, to take a moment of responsibility and moral agency, but rather it's some sort of like concatenation, assemblage of all of those different things, and ascribing some sort of primary cause is fundamentally impossible for the reasons that have framed our entire discussion of Jackie in this chapter.
Do you think we're supposed to read Fred as a villain?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
It's interesting that he like gets us there by way of also so many moves that like appeal to a broader kind of sympathy for him, for his. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love a complex villain, so I'm into this. But
of course.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to take that question a step further, to ask, I think that Jackie, there's an odd similarity between Keeper that particularly comes through in this chapter, where for maybe the first time, those are two very aligned characters. So obviously they're from the Midwest. They're haunted by their parents and by their youths and by precarity, right, of their upbringing. And they both involve Markley posing the classic question to the reader of, to what extent are you going to identify with these problematic and or bad people? Yeah. And to what extent are you willing, wanting, wishing, fantasizing, projecting some sort of moral redemption arc for them?
Yeah.
And I think that there's that resonance between the two characters.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I think it's interesting, though, the kind of there's a displacement of it a little bit in Jackie's case, I think, because of Fred.
Of course.
Which is also fascinating, because if you're like, oh, I can totally ask this about Fred, but I can't ask it about Jackie. Like that's also another kind of, I think, invitation.
Yeah.
Man, there's so much in this chapter.
Do you feel like we've exhausted the problem and solution? I don't know how much we solved, but. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, if things come up, we can jump around at our presentation.
Perfect. Let's move on to the key product features. Slide 1, 40 minutes. We're on top of things.
Classic.
What's your one sentence summary?
Okay, I went with Jackie wrestles with guilt, dread, and unease as the contradictions of her life become unbearably and increasingly impossible to ignore.
Great. I went with a chapter of multiple reckonings tears Jackie between her past, present, and maybe future self as she observes and feels her way through the novel's political plotting.
Great. Man.
I think those are...
Hit all the notes.
They're moving on the same track.
Yeah, they are. The converge has verged.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So now we move to the market and competitive landscape portion of this pitch.
Yes. Mine's a little basic, so I'm going to turn it over to you first, I think.
Okay. I'm going to cheat.
Yes.
And give us 2.
I love that. I'm going to be cheating very shortly, so I support this move fully.
Okay. So I want to look at a couple different moments in the chapter first to frame this, the use of these 2 theoretical frameworks as a way to think about some questions here. So one is on 579, and this is a phenomena that like gets taken up a couple times. So on the TV, right, overlooking the Art Deco lobby, CNN has a camera crew pointed out a view of Manhattan looking south across the East River. An enormous crowd had gathered in front of 2 loading bay doors at a warehouse because a truck had crashed into one of the metal shutters, warping it inward. Something about looting, feeling dread, blah, blah, blah. And then later, the riots at Hunts Point, right, come up again when they go to the restaurant and there's like a million things that they can't have because there's a disruption to the supply line that has to do with this issue at this warehouse, right, this crash. Okay, so put a pin in that. On 581, we have Fred, I think, talking about his kind of like new, the kids, the smart kids on the team that create the report called Position for Disruption Strategy for Energy, Commodities, and Security Investment.
Great title.
Jackie says apocalyptic title. And Fred says smart kids on that team, but they're hyped on the grandeur of thinking they can puppeteer the world. And then I want to look at the discussion that Fred and Jackie have about the like framing the Arctic, mining the Arctic as ESG.
Perfect.
So on 583, we get Fred saying, right, Jackie says, really mining the Arctic as ESG? And he says, well, people have been ringing alarm bells on the melt for decades, right? But the warming is having all these incredible benefits. We now have ice-free ship passage in the Arctic, the greatest boon to world trade since the Clinton administration, LOL, which is one of my millennial comedy notes. Then there are the new energy horizons in Greenland. Yep. Just these unfathomable fortunes of minerals, uranium, and even oil and gas if the majors can lean on them to reopen exploration. And the precision companies can operate with now. We're talking minimal impact. It'll be like they weren't even there, which is fascinating. Okay. And then on the next page, this is part what you read already, but like he says, governments of the world are going to have to keep paying him to put those nanoparticles into the sky for the next century at least. Our boy Norm Nate, right? Coining the Marco Annovedo management. So managing the temperature will become about as easy as you and I playing with a thermostat, as long as we don't elect anyone dumb enough to interfere and strand good tech fixes. Okay, so I want to propose that these kind of collection of exchanges or passages or happenings are giving us a way to think about Jackie's crisis of conscience through the frameworks of affect and agency.
Hell yeah.
And that all of these are kind of like agentic objects or hyper objects, either both like in the novel, but also in Jackie's kind of life and world.
I love this so much.
Okay. So we're going to start with Timothy Morton.
Of course.
Okay. On hyper objects. So this is Philosophy and Ecology After the End of the World. And I want to look at just a couple things from the introduction here. So one is just like what he describes as a hyperobject just in the beginning. Hyperobjects have numerous properties in common. They are viscous, which means that they stick to beings that are involved with them. They are non-local. In other words, any local manifestation of a hyperobject is not directly the hyperobject. They involve profoundly different temporalities than the human scale ones we're used to. They generate space-time vortices due to general relativity. Hyperobjects occupy a high-dimensional phase space that results in their being invisible to humans for stretches of time. They exhibit their effects interobjectively, their interrelationships between aesthetic properties. And then he moves from the description of what a hyperobject is to the question of kind of action and agency. So hyperobjects have already had a significant impact on human social and psychic space. Hyperobjects are directly responsible for the end of the world, rendering both denialism and apocalyptic environmentalism obsolete.
Wow.
Hyperobjects have already ushered in a new human phase of hypocrisy, weakness, and lameness. These terms have a very specific resonance Hypocrisy results from the conditions of the impossibility of a meta-language. Weakness from the gap between phenomenon and thing, which the hyperobject makes disturbingly visible, and lameness from the fact that all entities are fragile as a condition of possibility for their existence. And hyperobjects make this fragility conspicuous, which I think is a really interesting framing there. And then one other thing from this book that I think is really interesting because it came out in...
while we were in grad school.
2013, yeah. And I've seen him say things about this, but I think it's important in 2013. And arguably right now, he insists on using global warming instead of climate change for, I think, a kind of strategic reason, but also a sort of diagnostic reason. But he says, the replacing of climate change, of global warming with climate change has affected essentially a decrease in appropriate levels of concern, which I think is really interesting. And it that just observation, I think, mirrors what kind of Fred's doing in rendering the sort of benefits of mining the Arctic. ESG. Yeah. Okay. So then I want to also offer one little bit from Jane Bennett's discussion of vibrant matter.
An appropriate pairing.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to just quickly read the anecdote she uses to talk about thing power in the beginning of chapter 1. So this is on page 4. On a Sunday, Tuesday morning on the 4th of June, in the grate over the storm drain to the Chesapeake Bay in front of Sam's Bagels on Cold Spring Lane in Baltimore, there was one large men's black plastic work glove, one dense mat of oak pollen, one unblemished dead rat, one white plastic bottle cap, one smooth stick of wood. Glove, pollen, rat, cap, stick. As I encountered these items, they shimmied back and forth between debris and thing, between, on the one hand, stuff to ignore, except insofar as it betokened human activity, and on the other hand, stuff that commanded attention in its own right, as existence in excess of their association with human meanings, habits, or projects. In the second moment, stuff exhibited its thing power. It issued a call, even if I did not quite understand what it was saying. At the very least, it provoked affects in me. I was repelled by the dead, or was it merely sleeping rat, and dismayed by the litter. But I also felt something else, a nameless awareness of the impossible singularity of that rat, that configuration of pollen, that otherwise utterly banal, mass-produced plastic water bottle cap. So the dumb kind of agency that these things affect over you is you're grossed out, and also you change your physical path of how you walk right through the streets of Baltimore in the morning. But then I also want to look at the questions that Bennett raises in this book about moral responsibility. So this is in the chapter Agency of Assemblages, and this is on page 37. So to affirm a vitality distributed along a continuum of ontological types and to identify the human, non-human assemblage as a locus of agency is to unsettle this belief, the belief that humans are special in the sense of existing outside of the order of material nature. But must a distributive composite notion of agency thereby abandon the attempt to hold individuals responsible for their actions or hold officials accountable to the public? The directors of the First Energy Corporation were all too eager to reach this conclusion in the task force report. No one really is to blame. Though it is unlikely that the energy traders shared my vital materialism, I too find it hard to assign the strongest or most punitive version of moral responsibility to them. Autonomy and strong responsibility seem to me to be empirically false, and thus their invocation seems tinged with injustice. In emphasizing the ensemble nature of action and the interconnections between persons and things, a theory of vibrant matter presents individuals as simply incapable of bearing full responsibility for their effects. So Bennett, I think, is maybe offering a different way to think about the kind of question that we've been framing as a psychoanalytic question for Jackie, which is less about Jackie's ability to reckon with herself or to kind of access a version of herself that feels best or truest or something, or most successful, right? Depending on kind of what frame she's using to render herself in what moment. But that actually what Jackie's struggling with is herself in the world and herself relative to others, both human and non-human others. And I think there's this question of what hyper objects in Jackie's world or in the world of the novel are kind of like agentically or affectively kind of intruding on this project of sort of self-discovery and like shaping actually these paths that are doubled but maybe converging. And so like very clearly, I think the Great Eastern Flood is like a hyper object in Jackie's world.
Yes.
I think debt is a hyper object in Jackie's world in the way Markley is rendering the question of her agency for us, but also for herself.
That's so good.
I also think in this chapter, the Arctic is like a very interesting hyper object. And I think to speak to your point that like the genre of this chapter is sort of like more mysterious than some other ones, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, like we're deep in the throes of the political thriller component of this book for
Absolutely.
sure. But like that there's something about the Arctic and the like future, but like near present future of the Arctic in 2035 in the novel as like disappearing, right? So a thing that is no longer, but in being no longer is exerting agency over a whole host of things. But the question is, how do we like capture that agency and do we direct it, right? That affect, that intensity, the thingness of the disappearance of the Arctic, right? So in its absence, it's a thing that does something, right? And I think Markley, whether consciously or not, is like playing with that and like what it means to reckon with that. And he gives us like, I think a kind of villainous, like assessment of it, which is that we can benefit from this, right? That it's like, and it taps into the like belief about humans as exceptional that Bennett is trying to undermine at the same time as it acknowledges the kind of contingency of that possibility, which I think is really interesting because I think it also makes Fred, again, a more complicated villain. Absolutely. Like, it's not like, look what we did. We did this intentionally to maximize, right? It's like, oh, oops, this accidental like opening is here. And there's like so there's both a correct like deferral or displacement of agency and an incorrect deferral or displacement of agency at the same time.
For Jackie or appropriate for the human condition in a new materialist world, isn't? Yeah.
So I want to propose that like that Jackie's journey of self-discovery is like limited by her failure to perceive these objects in her life as like interfering with her agency or acting upon her, and that she's asking the wrong moral questions because of this failure perception. But maybe the thing that we didn't see, the thing that she's read, this new knowledge that she has is like shifting her understanding of her relationship to like all the objects in her life, not just other human objects. That's my proposal.
I love that last part of the proposal. I love the whole thing. I love that last part of the proposal in particular, because one of the hyper objects I was going to add to your list of, I think, on point hyper objects in Jackie's life in this novel is Ash's model / the algorithm forecasting AI that is built upon it. And that moment at the end of the chapter is perhaps Jackie attuning herself to one of those hyper objects, precisely the way you identified.
Yeah. And then maybe, I think this is cryptic foreshadowing, but I think that's a way to think about what comes, maybe.
Absolutely. I'd also posit that you maybe solved the riddle of the chapter titles. All of Jackie's chapter titles are hyper objects.
Oh, okay. Wow. I didn't even know I solved it. Amazing.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. That was a little long.
No, I love it. I'm going to go in a much more basic direction, and in some ways a direction that runs oddly counter to your competitive landscape in marketing. We're going to give them two pitches, two alternatives to the listeners. I would propose that we think about this chapter in relationship to Cauchione and McKinnon's Climate Change and Political Theory.
Ooh.
And precisely the moment where Jeffrey tears down Jackie's entire world and potentially offers a thesis statement for the entire novel. So just to reread this again, it's on page 599. No, I get it. You have to convince yourself that doing well and doing good are the same thing. The whole world's run by people who think even when the dark days come, they'll just sub in money for justice and it'll all be fine. And there's that subbing in of money for justice that I think is a really key turning point for something that McKinnon's book does, I think, particularly well. So I think that this is a really good book to teach with. I taught a couple chapters of it in my justice seminar. I'm teaching some of it in EPT this fall. It's clear, it's readable as far as theory goes. It's like pretty direct. It doesn't really pull punches. It's pretty concise, so on and so forth. So I think it's a good text for teaching. One specific point that I think McKinnon's very useful for making is the necessity of thinking about climate change through political theory or political philosophy, and that there's a necessity of addressing the ethical problems, which are always political problems, and that she is maybe clearer than others, perhaps particularly as a teaching tool or for students, about why climate change or global warming is not just a scientific and collective action or cooperation problem. Okay? So there's a bunch of ways in she does this. I think chapter 2 and chapter 5 are particularly useful for the way that she does that. And a lot of the emphasis she puts is insisting on climate change as a question for thinking about responsibility, and responsibility having both an ethical and political valence, which are always very much tied to one another. And so, like, as she points out, so this is in chapter 5, this is on page 119. Although perhaps not apparent on the surface, much of the knottiest points, KNOTTIEST points of friction in climate agreements and policymaking relate to questions of responsibility, which agents have it and why, and the duties it generates for those agents. Debates in political theory and philosophy about these issues matter. And she actually uses that as a concluding thought. But throughout the book, there's a lot of ways in which she insists on that necessity of thinking about climate change through the level of responsibility from the perspective of theory, while simultaneously saying that the theoretical questions by necessity bear on the political practice. You know, and there's like many different ways in which she does this throughout the book. So she talks about the shortcomings in a lot of the major political and ethical theories, that the way they would, in terms of the way that they would address climate change, right? So she critiques utilitarianism, liberalism, socialism, libertarianism, and capitalism, all as having some sort of lack in how they think about climate change, and perhaps particularly that responsibility question, thinking about the ways that the causes and the effects and discussions of climate change are dispersed across the globe and also across time when we start to think generationally, thinking about kind of individual responsibilities and duties in addition to like a kind of policy, public, political, state-based or international-based subset of duties and responsibilities, thinking about the need to assess the quality of different technical solutions, policy proposals, scientific proposals, models of cooperation or collective action, and all of those sorts of things. For her, all of those are political questions and by necessity political theory questions. And the way that she captures that throughout the book is, I think, really effective for a reader who might not initially think that climate change is about political theory or whatever their idea of political theory might be. I'm also really, really intrigued by the way she discusses the ongoing necessity of political theory-like thinking, even if we're as pessimistic as we possibly can be. And so, like you mentioned before we started talking, that there's this little bit of like catapulting into this Jackie chapter of parenting at the end of the world. And McKinnon, I think this is in chapter 2 of the book, I might be misremembering that, discusses the way that like, even if we grant the most skeptical political and moral theory and the most pessimistic forecasts for climate change and global warmings, that there are still better and worse ways of living with even some of the most drastic possible outcomes, that there is ethical work worth in attempting to address climate change, even if 2 degrees of warming is unlikely, right? Not that humanity has even tried that, she points out, that we must assess how stable and feasible different possible policies are, whether it's a 2-degree warming world or a 3.5-degree warming world, and that we can and should still ask what ethics mean, or specifically what justice requires, even in the most catastrophic scenarios.
Okay, I'm going to say that I think actually my theory and your theory are compatible.
Please, go for it.
Okay, I think what's really fascinating is that like one read of the like pessimism that sort of preempts action is that there is nothing we can do, right? So it's sort of undermining actually our ability to act, and undermining like how intertwined our ability to act as humans is with like the non-human actants that sort of shape the possible trajectories of like co-action, right?
That's
co-acting
really
together. And
so
then
it's a reclamation of partial agency.
Totally. And I also think the question of responsibility, like the way you framed the discussion from the book, is like actually the project of figuring out once and for all who bears full responsibility is sort of counter to the project of assigning like partial distributed responsibility so that it can be directed toward an action. And so thinking about the relationship between like affect, action, and responsibility in this kind of like more, networky, like nebulous way, rather than the kind of like single line sort of causal way. And then like also the idea that I'm hearing too, that like, if we think there's only one right answer, then we've sort of like foreclosed a range of possible answers,
and have abdicated responsibility.
Yeah. And have abdicated responsibility and done nothing, right? Which is which I think your point that she raised, that like we haven't even tried that, right? We keep talking about things that we could or could not try, and really what we've tried is nothing. Yeah, I think those are, I'm going to argue they're complementary.
It did occur to me as I was going through that maybe she's showing us that political theory is a hyperobject.
Yes.
And so like to quickly tie it back to the chapter, like I think that Jeffrey's diagnosis is not only a diagnosis of Fred or of Jackie and like the superficiality of her supposed bleeding heart, or in the double talk of the way she thinks about Kate or the siege or climate or mining the Arctic as ESG, but that Jeffrey on this interpersonal, personalist, political level makes the case for why you must think about justice. And it's as if he was confronting Jackie with Catriona McKinnon.
I love that. Wow, I'm convinced.
Thank you.
We got to find a place for this book.
I know, right? Simon & Schuster, we're available. DMs are open.
Well, I think we've made a really good case for why our product fits into the market and competitive landscape.
It does.
And acts on the market and competitive landscape.
It intervenes, yes.
Should we move to our operating model?
Yeah, lots of
a thing that I know.
Great dark humor in this one. I laugh so hard at Jackie's commenter therapist on the first page of the chapter. Eric wouldn't talk about it, their mom's death, if Zuritas cuffed him to a chair and hooked him up to a car battery.
Yeah. Yikes. Like, so funny. Ooh. I also really liked her description of her therapist as that she cared, not in the sense that she empathized, but like she was an alien who just found humans fascinating.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, it's really good. Which would work as a description of Ash.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I also like that the therapist says, you know what, if it costs Fred half his money, he'll still be more than fine. He can ask you for an allowance.
That's a good point.
Really good. Yeah.
I have another, this is like, I didn't love that this thought crossed my mind, but is the fact that Fred gets his work done at Noxium Spa a Nexium joke?
Okay. So I looked into this. So Noxium there's like a couple kind of pop cultural instances of Noxium. I think it could be a Nexium reference, but also there is an appearance of a substance called Noxium in the Legion of Doom lore.
Incredible.
So like Superman. So it's a crystalline substance that was invented by Dr. Nataz, a former member of the Legion of Doom. So when he becomes like a villain, he generates this substance, this crystalline that contains all of the weaknesses that are needed to kill every member of the Super Friends group. So like yellow energy for Green Lantern, green kryptonite for Superman. And then like Lex Luthor has a plot to kind of destroy all of these Super Friends, like with this other legion of villains, but using the crystal, but they don't succeed because they actually end up attacking robot duplicates of the Super Friends.
Oh my God.
Which is just like so weird for our discussion of the doubling in this chapter.
And also
like,
the AI or algorithm is hyperobject.
Yeah. Yes. Very much so. But I also just think as like, if you think about Noxium as a, like, in its, as a form of the word noxious, right? That you could use it as a way to describe a person's kind of like affect or something.
Yes. Their atmosphere aura is one of Noxium. Yeah. I love it.
So, but I also thought about Nexium and like, it's just what a great capital N kind of like description of a spa where Fred goes to look younger, but he's tinged slightly orange. Yeah. Artificial. Ugh, so good. I don't, for some reason I get sometimes like really fixated on these like made up things or not.
I mean,
fully made up.
We're dozens of hours into this podcast. I think it's totally explicable. Yeah.
Okay. I also thought it was really interesting that she like, and sort of funny that she specifically like drops the name brand of their like robot that cleans their apartment that she like has learned not to notice.
Yes.
And it's like a real brand. And it's a real brand that is like an Swiss German brand that like started after World War II and now has like, you know, factories all over the world. And the family, still in the same family, they were like billionaires in like 2004. So they're like billionaires several times over at this point. So it's like, oh, the billionaire corporation making like in-home cleaning robots for like other billionaires is just like interesting kind of circularity there.
The whole conversation with Linda Holiday is really funny.
Yeah.
Linda saying, and yes, I'm with the kids. Un-PC words are back in. Or that they're going to get hog wild, which refers to having a couple of drinks. Asking Jackie, did you hit that? R.E. Gruber. And then the HR violation, the human rights violations in Equatorial Guinea. Sure, let's rehab your brand line that you offered us earlier.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, their whole conversation's funny. And like, yeah. What else did I have? I feel like the humor kind of...
the buying a home in London's Marylebone district just because it has a residential tax haven and we'd probably spend less than 2 weeks a year there.
Yeah,
Ouch.
Tough. I mean, I thought like Jeffrey was rendered amusingly before they start the fight. Like,
absolutely. Jeff Jr. hates his name, so he goes by Caspian. One day, the kid just comes home from school, says he has no gender, and demands everyone calls him Caspian.
Yeah, so funny. Also, like the line that follows that, he's about to turn 12, which we're terrified of because that's when Britt's personality transplant began. It's just like a funny way to refer to your kid. Yeah.
Should we head on to our crux of our funding request?
Yes.
I've got, keeping in line with funding request, riffing off of a song title that came into my head while I was reading this chapter, and so I ran with it. Money for Justice and Mining the Arctic for Free.
Ooh, that's really good. Okay, so let me just read all the titles that we get actually in this chapter. So we get Position for Disruption, Strategy for Energy, Commodities, and Security Investment. We get something called Chaos of Investment.
Yep. We get The New Gray Edge.
The New Gray Edge, Political Process in Developed Nations is the full title there.
Oof.
And then we also have, it's not a title, but it's the catchphrase that Fred doesn't like, but Peter does, which is socially responsible extraction. So I feel like we need to work in Chaos of Investment in there somehow, but maybe we do Chaos of Investment and then
Money for Justice, mining the Arctic for free.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm into it.
Mining the Arctic has to be in there. Yeah, it's really good. Ugh. I also, the fact that like they appear somewhat comedically, I think, but also darkly in this chapter is really interesting because like we don't get, I think, titles of like reports and other Jackie chapters, right? So I was like, these are in here, but we didn't know that before we planned the gimmick.
Yeah. It's also worth
the tail's eating itself or whatever.
And another way it's doing that is that we get another drop of We Are the Deluge.
Yeah.
Rendered in bold font in the chapter.
Oh, so true.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we move on to the projections point of our pitch.
I'm gonna pull an Emily Crandall. I've got 2.
Yes.
And, you know, you could have a beautiful day of pairing all of these things together. So cultural projection number 1 are the 2 movies by writer-director Celine Song.
Ooh.
And that this chapter is a synthesis of the past lives materialists dialectic.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. I'm so here for this.
Okay. So in past lives, we have kind of almost perfect, I think, parallel characters. So you have, of course, Jackie and Nora. You have Fred and Arthur, Nora's current partner. Mm-hmm. You have Jeffrey from the past and Hey Son from the past. Mm-hmm. And Jackie is in a truly different world than the world she grew up in, certainly, but even a somewhat different world than when she was with Jeffrey. So like, okay, Hey Son and Nora grew up together in South Korea, and now Nora is in New York City and his son still lives in South Korea. So like the amount of difference between the 2 characters is a little bit different, but in the way in which both the arrival of his son in New York City and the arrival of Jeffrey in New York City cause such deep questioning of the self and kind of what choices did I make along the way? What choices did I not make or abdicate? What does that mean for the life that I'm living? And crucially, for both Nora and Jackie, is the trajectory that my life is on the trajectory I want it to be on? And if not, is there anything that I would want to do that's worth doing to try to change that? Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's the structure of this chapter and the dialectic of Fred and Fred and Jeffrey models the kind of dialectic of Arthur and his son, especially because both Fred and Arthur in their respective texts are like in some ways perfect for their partner. And in some ways, both the book and the film go out of their way to depict the ways that those characters are insufficient or lacking in general, and then specifically for the main character.
Well, and as like a foil of one another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the materialist part of this, which I liked more than most, I think.
I did too.
She chose her version of Pedro Pascal's character. And so like this novel, Jackie's arc within it is a version of if Celine Song had written Materialists, in which Dakota Johnson's character chooses Pedro Pascal's character.
Yeah, totally.
As opposed to the spoiler alert choosing of Chris Evans's character.
Yeah.
And there's something about like the lovable fuck upness of Jeffrey kind of in some of the ways he's depicted, and Chris Evans' characters in Materialist that makes that parallel work as well. So my basic projection is that this chapter is synthesizing the 2 Celine Song works.
I love that.
And then my second one, I'll go much quicker here, is Meg Wolitzer's novel, The Interestings.
Oh, I haven't read that one.
I think it was an Amy Schiller recommendation, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe a Daniel Hanley recommendation, actually, in which there are several characters there who are reckoning in adult life with the choices that they made in their, particularly like for them, late childhood and then or especially early adulthood, about career, love, class, and wealth vis-a-vis their younger self. And that one of the questions that Wolitzer is, I think, working through in that novel is a question about the continuity of a character or of a self over time. And I think that Jackie is all about like the discontinuity or lack of unity of the self over time.
I love that.
And then a very tiny one I'll throw out is that all of the ESG jokes made me think of the third season of Industry.
Oh, yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. So I want to think about Jackie's not front of kind of conscious like obsession, but I think back of consciousness, fear / obsession of rising water.
Ooh, okay.
So we get on, this is really brief, but on 580, when she's going home, a description of where they live. Where she says,
I would propose this as an example of how the flood is a hyper object for her.
Yes.
This is a manifestation of that in her life.
Yeah. Past our doorman, the security team, trickling fountain, tall bamboo plants, down the handsome slate tiled hallway, up the private elevator. We were Upper West Side, expensive zip code to be sure, but not Billionaires Row. For a relatively cheap $5.6 million, we had our own floor, 4,500 square feet, a Juliet balcony, and a fireplace. Most importantly, it was not ground floor, and the building had the best flood-resistant measures architecture could buy. Natural gas generators, clean water storage in case of power outages, and all heating, ventilation, and electrical machinery elevated 7 meters above street level. Okay, so I want to propose we interrogate Jackie's fear of flood with 2 novels by J.G. Ballard.
Oh, okay. I was going to go with a different flood, but I'm interested about this.
Okay. One is called High Rise, which is basically a very similar premise to Snowpiercer, but it's in an apartment building, not on a train. And the other is Drowned World, which is a novel where like most of the world is covered in ocean, and the kind of existing civilizations still live like in the poles or like on big ships that kind of resemble like a cruise ship, but the ships like have to kind of stay in northern or in the ocean water that is closer to the poles. The closer you get to the equator, the kind of there's like a something that happens kind of at the level of the psyche where you become like you descend into madness, but also like the physical body becomes more like less mammalian and more amphibian. So it's this really interesting like rumination on the sort of like dissolution of the human in the kind of like Enlightenment Western sense, as it becomes closer to like the non-human, the irrational, the animal, the whatever, and the Drowned World is the kind of premise for that. But High Rise, they're not related, but he was just like an interesting guy who was really interested in like thinking through kind of like the cost kind of like psychically and socially and politically of technology. And so let's see, Drowned World came out in 1962, and what year did High Rise came out in 1975. So in High Rise, it's like rich people live at the top of the building, poor people live at the bottom, and there's a flood, right? Like, and so the people on the bottom of the building are trying to get to the top, and violence ensues. And it's like a really kind of straight up interrogation of class. But I think like pairing them is a really interesting way to think about the relationship between our kind of immediate future fears spurred by climate change and our like apocalyptic future fears about climate change, and like interrogating the passage from the super near future to the less near future, and in so doing the realisticness of the relationship between our super near future fears and are like future fears that like civilization as we know it and thus our ability to like recognize ourselves as humans will be like undermined or no longer exist, right?
Incredible.
And like for Jackie, it's like I need to live right now far enough, high enough up so that I'm safe from water, right? Like creeping, climbing water, but also from like poverty, right? I want to be safe from the riots. I want to be safe from the hordes. I want to be safe from not just like the people that are poor as a threat to me, but like the idea of poverty as a threat to like my sense of who I am and as a threat to all the choices I've made so far, right? To kind of, I think, connect your cultural artifact to this one. But then there's also like the precarity of a class that is literally kind of suspended in air above everyone else, the sort of like physical precarity of that, right? Because like, sure, you're safe way up there, but like when you are no longer safe up there, where do you go, right? And like, what will you do? Who will you become? And at what point are you no longer recognizably human to yourself or to others? And then like, where and when are we in the near future, short term, and when are we in the like post-apocalyptic near, you know what I mean? And like,
right. And the undecidability of that threshold.
Yeah. So I want to propose J.G. Ballard as offering a way to interrogate Jackie's fear of flood, but also fear of poverty and the relationship between her like immediate concrete fears and these like abstract future fears.
And the experience she directly has with both the unhoused person on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, and then by proxy, the two people who self-immolate at the other restaurant where Fred had dinner. And there's something about the immediacy of those experiences for her that speak to what you're talking about in the Ballard.
Yeah. And like they're dining in public, but they're dining in places that are inaccessible to like most of the public, but they're still in public, right? There's this proximity and distance that's simultaneous. And so I think that is like an interesting frame too.
Well, now there's a whole Berlant thing we could do, but there's not time.
No time. Okay, last big part of the pitch deck is the team.
Yep.
We've talked a lot about Jeffrey. Yeah.
Peter, we get, I think it's really effective that Markley uses Ash to make Peter seem the bro with a heart of gold. Yeah. And then the Jackie chapters are Peter's up to some extremely shady fuckery.
Like nefarious shit. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think the most important kind of character development here is there's like the way Kate appears is, I think, really, it was read really different to me from how she's appeared in other Jackie chapters.
Absolutely.
Fred accuses her of defending Kate, which I don't think is like an accusation that could have been leveled at her before. If anything, she was like the architect of Kate's destruction, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Which has not, I think, been said so explicitly. It's been hinted at and kind of orthogonally like confirmed.
Yes.
Yeah. But here she says she didn't want her to fail.
Yes. I did not want to see her embarrassed. And then I did not want to see her fail. And then I did not want to see her harmed.
What is going on?
So I'm trying to decide how cryptic to be in the foreshadowing. There are so many characters whose point of views we get in this novel who have these ties to Kate that are beyond Matt. And I think that the explicit contrast of Jackie and Kate, which has happened a couple of times up to this point, right, in Jackie 2 and Jackie 3, flipping over into a sympathy or like almost paternalism towards or protectionist impulse towards Kate is part of what signals to the reader that whatever resolve Jackie has mustered at the end of the chapter, that it's meant to signify the shift that speaks to there being something about the contrast between the two of them, or or Jackie destroying Kate's life being something that is out of whatever we could say Jackie's true self is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because, like, again, it's the things that we know are there that we're not acknowledging, right? The kind of presence, non-presence of the thing. Oh, so maybe like Kate is a hyper object.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going to go. Kate is the hyper object of this novel.
Of the novel.
Because she doesn't get a point of view.
Honestly, incredible.
Except for kind of the siege. But that's the siege is its own hyper object.
Oh my God, so true.
Return to later.
Wow. I feel like we could still talk about this, but I think our pitch deck has been a
success.
Exhausted.
Yes, exhausted and a resounding success.
Resounding success.
They just funded our nascent We Are the Deluge book project.
Yay.
For a $500 million valuation.
Perfect. That sounds like an ESG if I've ever heard it. So good.
Amazing.
Do we want to, have we left anything out?
I don't think so.
Beautiful. Oh man. Okay. Up next, we have another interlude.
Yes.
Slapdish presents. Oh boy.
I can't wait to talk about that with you.
Okay. So it's a news analysis published in Slate, but presented by Slapdish.
Something like that.
Okay. We'll figure it out when we get there.
We'll figure it out when we get there. It sounds right.
And then we have our last chapter of book 4, right? Keeper
4, the ghost and the mask.
Wow. Well, there's 2 cultural artifacts right there.
Okay, are you? Is that our challenge that we have to relate it to one or both of those cultural artifacts that are contained within the title?
Yeah, both. Amazing. Well, stay tuned, everyone, for this exciting effort of pairing a Keeper chapter with Ghost and the Mask.
The Mask, yes. I was the Mask for Halloween one year.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us once again on We Are the Deluge.
And we are the Deluge.